You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. I don't know what happened to the opera lady today. I think her voice is broken. So welcome to the big show. As always, friends and families and neighbors, to the Chris Voss Show for over 16 years and 2,300 episodes. About to clock over to 2,400 episodes. We've been bringing the Chris Voss Show, an astounding feat of the most amazing minds that come to us to guests on the show. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTokity, and all those crazy places on the internet. Today we have an amazing young man on the show, and we're talking about, as John Lovitz from SNL would put it, acting. I don't know. That's a good impression of him, and we're going to be talking about acting, storytelling, writing, things of that nature, and how to be better at it. Today we are joined with Jordan Christopher Morris, aka the writer igniter. I think that we'll have to find out what that means. Jordan is a writer, producer, and screenwriting coach known for his warm, approachable style and genuine passion for helping writers succeed. Whether you're a beginner or seasoned storyteller, Jordan works with writers of all backgrounds and skill levels to help them uncover their unique voice and craft stories that truly resonate. His secret is a revolutionary approach to storytelling. He teaches a signature life and death story model, a fresh take on story architecture that helps writers build compelling narratives. Welcome to the show, Jordan. How are you?
I'm very well, sir. Great to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to have you as well. Give us your .coms. Where can you find people on the internets?
I kept a low profile until recently, but I do have my own website, which is jordanmorriswriterigniter.com, and you can find everything you need there, including how to reach me. So, Jordan, you use the life and death story model in what you teach with your students and people you help. Is that where you put a gun to people's head and say, write it or else? Something like that. Yeah. There has to be high stakes involved. And the life and death story model that I use is kind of unique in the space. So it breaks down all the major architecture of telling a narrative story in a different way that explains itself and gives every one of the major components a very clear and a unique job to do. The results have been really, really good since I've been working with people. It takes a while to get used to, but once they get it, they really seem to take off with it.
So where does the moniker, I think it's moniker if I'm using my English correctly, writer igniter come from? What does it mean?
Just igniting a passion for storytelling, igniting a passion for moving people on an emotional level, and helping people develop their own unique narrative voice. In this industry, and really in any kind of writing, if you're replaceable, then you will be replaced. Yeah. So I think the best defense is a good offense, and that's writing stuff that only you can write, that's unique to you, tonally, subject matter, theme-wise. And that's probably the most rewarding part of it, when I see the lights come on and people start to really get comfortable in their own skin and know what their brand and what their voice is. Then they go on to write really special stuff, and that's great.
Oh. Yeah. Why is storytelling important? Why are stories important?
We've been doing it for, since the dawn of time. And I think it's a way for us to learn what it means to be a human being and what the human experience is all about, initially through things like mythology and folklore. And movie and TV today is really just modern mythology. So if you don't have a really good grasp of the fundamentals of story architecture, then typically what comes out is just a little bit of a muddied mess. So it's worth learning the fundamentals first, so that you can really articulate your ideas and again, create something with emotional resonance, because it really shouldn't just be about the plot. It should be about the kind of emotional journey that your characters go on. And if you're not great at articulating that, then you'd better be Michael Bay and be able to afford a lot of explosions and, fast moving objects. to distract people for your hour and a half or however long it is.
But car crashes, car chases, explosions, and more explosions, and the Michael Bay movies just explode everything, and I don't know. And 2 hours later, you have something, I guess.
Yeah, and immediately after that, you forget about it. What just happened? I don't know, but it was loud and colorful.
I don't know, it's loud and colorful, and I'm very excited about the explosions, and my heart's racing. So something good must have happened. But storytelling is interesting to me. I don't think I was really 50 until I realized, or in my late 40s, so I realized the importance of storytelling, and that I'd been a story collector all my life. And someone came on the show a few years ago, and they introduced me to the term griot. And griots were West African oral historians. They were musicians who would preserve and then share the cultural traditions. And they would basically be the historians for the tribe. The tribe would have its history. Back then, they didn't have a lot of stuff to write it down with, or stuff that you could keep it well with. And so they would, this griot would be the person who would keep track of their histories. And like you say, all through time, we've collected stories, and stories are kind of like what I like to call the owner's manual to life, where you don't get an owner's manual to life. So we tell each other stories so that we can learn from each other, and we can see that we're not alone, and that our struggles are the same, and that, we're all human, as it were. And
we hope so. Yeah.
And so that's really what the Chris Voss Show does. We bring on people, they tell their stories, they share their lessons of life, the things they learned, the things they survived. And in the end, people come through it. Tell us about your history. And you're welcome to reply to my comment there. But tell us about your history too, how you grew up, when you started writing, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that most cultures started that way, with oral histories first, before the printed word became a thing. It was a standard that an important person within the tribe, so to speak, would memorize and then share these stories. And we've just been doing that in printed form, and now video and all other kinds of form like that. So yeah, story is really, really important. For me, it started out with things like comic books. I was obsessed with it. My uncle owned a comic book shop in my hometown, and I would haunt that place. Yeah. So I got to buy the few that I could afford, but then I got to skim through all the others that I couldn't. So I was pretty spoiled that way. But by the time I got to age about 12 or 13, I was given the opportunity of hanging out with my dad. My dad could really spin a yarn. So I would travel with him to friends of his. He was a car collector, and I would take me to garages and listen to other grown men tell stories amongst each other. And that was some of the most exciting stuff. I mean,
oh, wow.
The language, of course, that an adult men in a garage setting were using was pretty exciting. But it started to land on me how, even when they weren't thinking about it, the really good stories were structured in a certain way and had a punchline or something, or a climax of some kind. And I started to identify those rhythms really, really early on. And then took an interest in like scribbling my own comic books and trying to create my own stories. And from there, made my way into theater in high school, and then theater again as a young adult after I'd spent years away from it. And that's when my relationship with storytelling in particular got really, really intense. It was while I was in local theater here in Ontario, Canada.
Mm-hmm. You guys have a great theater up there too, the Second City for comedy and great stuff that trickles down to us.
And the Stratford Festival is just an hour north of us or so, and that's one of the best Shakespearean festivals in the world. So yeah, we've got a rich history of really, really strong storytelling up here. And that was great. Not only did I get to experiment with writing stories, but performing them in front of a live audience is the fastest way to learn. Once I started to write my own, when you walk out on stage and whatever you write just bombs and everything, and it doesn't work, you'll commit very quickly to learning why and making sure that never happens again. If you want to be a writer, I recommend everybody do it live in front of an audience and see what happens, because you'll learn quick.
Yeah. Unless you enjoy bombing. Bombing can be sometimes artful. Norm Macdonald from Canada, I think probably one of the best comedians ever in the world.
Oh, love Norm.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize Norm wrote for a lot of years for SNL, or a lot of decades. I mean, he wrote, I think pretty much the 40th anniversary. Sadly, he didn't see the 50th, but he was one of the most spectacular comedians I think I've ever seen or known or studied.
And a guy that
and
didn't
his
need to win over the audience, right? Like he didn't need that. He would try for it, but at times he seemed to just love having the audience turn on him, and you would just play with that as well. Yeah, so you could learn
you
lots from that.
you die to kill. And it's a really hard thing to do in comedy. There's few people that can really pull it off, where they can or they can die on purpose and kill.
Yeah.
You know, once the audience is into it, like most people would know after a while what Norm was up to, and they're like, "Yeah, he's pulling our chain, he's pulling our leg, he's, you know, he gets on Conan O'Brien and starts reading the newspaper." You know,
yeah.
What's his face used to do that? He might have been Canadian. It was the Taxi comedian, the guy who used to be on Taxi, the comedian who did the immigrant voice. I forget his name, but you know, he'd get up and read the Bible, or you know, just do stupid shit on stage and
push the boundaries of keeping people kind of hooked into your story, and pushing buttons too. They were both really, really good at. Are you talking about Andy Kaufman?
Andy Kaufman. Never remember his name.
Yeah, he was really good at pushing buttons, and that would be the reward. You know, most of us want applause or some kind of support from the audience, but those two guys didn't need that. As long as they had you hooked and they got an emotional response out of you, then they were happy.
Dave Chappelle does the same thing. He's really good at C.K. Lewis was great at it too.
Louis C.K. Yeah.
Louis C.K. Yeah. C.K. Lewis. That's a guy who wrote a book, right?
C.S. Lewis. Yeah, wrote the book. Yeah.
So Louis just kind of changed the name structure, and anyway, he's a great comedian. So tell us about some of these programs you offer on your website to help people, and who are your clients, so that people out there in the audience know.
Yeah, the thing that I've become most kind of sought after for is a program I've got called the Story Forge, which takes place over the course of 1 month. So it's two-hour sessions once a week for 4 weeks. And it's a really protracted kind of interview format where I just ask 1,000 questions about the writer and what their project is, what they hope to achieve with it, genre, theme, the character arc, all that. And I test the concept at its core at a conceptual level. But while I'm doing that, I help them kind of develop their own personal voice and decide what it is that they actually want to talk about. The 3 of the questions that we often talk about are, what's it about? What's it really about? And what are you trying to say? So what's it about is easy. That's plot. And that's where most people spend most of their efforts. But that's not where the big payoff is. What's it really about is about theme, which is a particularly frustrating and slippery subject for people to talk about and understand how to deploy in their work. And then the third one, what are you trying to say, is what do you want to say about that particular thematic idea or concept at the center of your story? How are you going to put your fingerprint on this? Over the course of a month, we build out the concept, and then we start laying it out in an outline form. And by the end of the month, we've got a very robust outline with up to 20 or 30 pages of information that they can use to then jump right into writing their first draft. So that thing's most often what I do. But then I've got a 6-month program that'll take somebody from just a fragment of an idea to a completed screenplay as well. So I can walk them through the whole thing too.
And learning to tell a story well is really important. It's good for communicating your ideas. It's good and engaging. I think technically we're all telling stories.
All the time.
All the time. We're telling stories to people in our lives. When I go on a date, I'm telling stories. They're telling me their stories. It's interesting. And the better you can tell stories, the more you can engage the audience, the more you can capture them, the more you can get them involved in what you're doing,
the more you can influence them. Yes.
Yeah. And we mentioned earlier some great comedians, George Carlin and Dave Chappelle, and different things where they can do comedy, but they can also educate. Like one of the hosts that I really admire is Stephen Colbert. Stephen Colbert has that ability to breach talking about politics on the late night show, Johnny's show. I'll just call it that. Fuck it. He has the ability to talk about politics, but be able to make it funny, and people tend to learn that way. And a lot of the good comedians can, they can take just about any subject, and you can teach through laughing. Because what's interesting is learning to laugh and hear our stories. I think it gets us outside of ourselves, and we can kind of see our own fallacies, as it were.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Some of the comedians that are good at telling longer stories, long form stories that are all set up, they'll take you by surprise so that you're not just having a knee-jerk reaction to maybe something that's challenging for you. You know, they've kind of worn you down and let you settle in a little bit before they deliver that punchline, which will be some kind of a epiphanal look at a subject that you may have already thought you had your mind made up on. That's really, really great. Yeah, and I grew up with the idea that the best story wins in all cases. And there's so many stories being told. Even if you go into the corporate world, they're looking for the best way to tell their stories so that they can win over people and, you know, sell their wares, whatever it may be. And I learned that when I was in the retail industry, because even when I stepped away from live performance for a while, I had a series of toy stores and retail at the peak of retail. It's kind of all dead now. Brick and mortar is kind of dead.
Thanks, Amazon.
Yeah. But at the peak of brick and mortar retail, I had a series of toy stores, and we would experiment with telling stories in the store. And it made us kind of an interesting destination for people. How we went about displaying our products and telling the stories behind every one of the toys that we sold, some of them new, some of them vintage, made a huge difference in how the audience, like the customers in the store, would respond to them.
Yeah. So when you sit down and teach people, how long do they work with you? I see you have a 6-month course, I think, or something.
Yeah, 6 months of screenplay is probably the longest course, the longest engagement that I have. And again, they can just show up with a fragment of an idea or maybe a first draft, and we'll basically start over, break it down, and rebuild it. And at the end of the 6 months, they'll have what I believe to be a professional quality screenplay that they could then take to producers or, you know, readers, whatever, and start marketing it into the industry. So that takes a lot of time. And that's broken up into 2 basic skill sets, which is storycraft, which is what we're talking about, and then pagecraft. And if you want to be a working screenwriter, you've got to have really top-notch pagecraft skills as well, which means how you display your work on the page. Because your pagecraft will either help you tell your story or hurt you. It's never a neutral. So you better learn those skills too. And screenwriting formatting is really weird and counterintuitive. So I refer to it as the platypus of creative writing, because it doesn't make any sense until you've spent a lot of time with it. And then hopefully you'll see it as an opportunity and not an obstacle that you have to get around.
Yeah. And telling stories makes people interesting. You know, if someone can't tell a good story, or I think what's the other thing that stories teach us is to look around at life and analyze it. I've told this before, but I used to have a wonderful girlfriend. She was a good lady, and we lived together for about 1.5 years. And I would come home with a million stories because, you know, I'm running 3 different companies. I've got, you know, hundreds of employees, and you know, every day there's something going on with these employees, right? I could have written 4 books of employee stories back then. I wish I had, because I can't remember them all now. But I mean, the stuff that would happen on a daily basis. Our first sexual harassment wasn't a woman, you know, claiming a man as sexually harassed him. It was 2 guys. I mean, it's, you know, it's just oddball stuff like that you're just like, I did not see that coming. And I think, so I would come home with stories every day, and I'd be like, yeah, you won't believe what happened with Bob at work today. Bob, but you know, this, that, and the other. And there, you know, there was always something interesting. When you have 100+ employees, you're going to have interesting stories every day to bring home. And then I would ask her, I would say, you know, what happened your day? Give me a story. Give me some stories. Be interesting. And she'd be like, nothing. And I'd be like, wait. Now, given she's a wonderful lady, but she worked for Delta as a flight attendant manager.
Oh, there has to be stories there.
So every day she's on a plane with 200 some odd people, talking to them individually about their beverage preference and nuts, and then she would travel to usually 1 or 2 routes and cities on an almost daily basis, and stay in hotels in like New York and Atlanta and stuff. And so I would just be like dumbfounded. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have any stories? You traveled through 4 airports today, hundreds of people. You didn't see anything weird. There's always some weird thing to see or weird person to see. It's probably me in the airport. Look at that Chris Voss. What's he wearing? Flip-flops and socks? You know, I'm probably the freak show, you know. If you don't know who the freak show is, it's probably you. But I would just be like, do you pay attention to what goes on in life? And I found there's some people, and they're good people, but they're just kind of barely operating in their own private Idaho. Like they're just functioning and they don't see the world around them. And I just always found it was so I eventually broke up with her because she was so boring. I reached a point where I was like, I think I even said this to her. I go, I've actually thought about hiring someone to kidnap you and just go hold you for a day or something, just so that you have a story to tell me. Hey, Chris, this van pulled up, and someone grabbed me. Just so you'd have a damn story. Like for 2 years, no stories.
There's a story everywhere. She had them every single day, but didn't see the value in them. That's interesting.
And so I think, number one, stories help us understand life. They help us understand ourselves. They're a reflection of ourselves. The great thing about comedy is comedy can kind of put that mirror up to us that most times you can't. People's ego gets in the way. But when they hold up that mirror and they can put it on a funny slant, you kind of go, yeah, that's really funny. I laugh at that. And, come to think of it, that is a stupid thing that we do as human beings, whatever the rap is. But also being able to tell stories is being interesting. I mean, she was just boring the crap out of me. She's a wonderful person, but she was boring the crap out of me. I'm like, I can't marry somebody who's just going through life dead inside. Same thing with jobs. I've hired hundreds of people over the years. Being able to tell a story in hiring and portray yourself in a way that you want to get a job and different things. Like I said, dating, being able to communicate well makes all the difference in the world. I mean, even if, you don't have to be a screenwriter, I guess what I'm saying. You don't have to be a book author. You don't have to, be, Cecil B. DeMay, whatever. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be used for anything other than just your daily communication and telling stories and telling them well.
Yeah. And you have to listen too. That's part of it.
What?
You have to exactly. If you're not paying attention to people and connecting with people, then you won't learn those stories and they won't be listening to you either. So that's kind of disappointing. But yeah. Like even when we were in, like I say, we were in retail, like learning how to tell great stories about these kind of old, rare, collectible toys that we'd have come through the store would make all the difference in the world. Because if you couldn't tell a good story, nobody would take an interest in the thing. But my favorite experiment that we had in the store was we had a series of superhero action figures, nothing unusual there, but they were by a company called Toy Biz, which made a particularly low quality toy. So some of them were really genuinely awful. And I ended up getting laden with a bunch of these things. The one that I remember is the Superman villain, Lex Luthor. And they would have an action in them. You squeeze their legs together and they would punch or do something. And then the Lex Luthor would raise his arm up because he's wearing the kryptonite ring. That would be a problem for Superman. But in this particular case, the toy was designed so poorly that when you squeezed his legs together, he would punch himself in the face. So we couldn't get rid of them because it looked bad and it wasn't fun to play with. But I took most of them and I hooked them up, put them on pegs in the aisle like you would in a regular toy store. But nobody would buy them. But I took one and I wrote a story about it and I put it in a glass cabinet with a light on it. And I said, worst action figure ever made, punches himself in the face, and just basically told a funny story about the thing. And we sold every one of those things out of the cabinet for twice as much money as the ones that were hanging on the hook.
It was the worst.
That's right. It's the worst toy ever made of its kind. Yeah.
People want to own that one.
Yeah. It was special.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like my first 8 marriages. Anyway, I don't know what that means, folks. It's just a marriage joke we do on the show. But yeah, learning to tell stories is so important. And, just being interesting in life, and we are, this is another thing I say on the show all the time. Stories are the fabric of life. They're what make us. Like, and we've talked about this on the show before, but, on one hand, we all don't have the greatest of stories. I mean, a lot of our stories are overcoming adversity, trauma. They're the phoenix rising from the ashes. This is why we love the hero's journey tale. It's the person who crawls out of the primordial soup and hell and hellfire and whatever, and comes through it all, and in the end wins. We love those stories because we want those for us. But stories of the fabric of life. You can look at your life and you can be like, some of the things maybe you don't get to choose your childhood or your family or your experience, but as you get older, you do. And you can look at your life, at the things you failed at, the things you made mistakes at, the things that didn't maybe go so well for you, and then how you've, Phoenix for the ashes, resurrected yourself from those challenges. On one hand, I'm resentful of some. I'm not actively resentful, but there's some things I rather would not have gone through as a child. But when you look at the arc of your life and the things that it contributed to shape you in the way that you are, that kind of help you succeed at what you do, you realize that you're nothing without those stories. It is the fabric of your entire life is your stories. You take my stories away, I got nothing to talk about. I learned nothing actually from life.
Walking, talking collections of scars. All of us have been through
it, that. And I got a lot of those scars. In fact, I'm missing a few limbs, I think.
That's really what the hero's journey is about. The hero enters the story with some kind of preconceived idea. They're broken in some way. So they've got it wrong about themselves, about the world, about their place in the world. And then you put them through hell. And it's that fire that you put them through that allows them to see things a little differently and finally grow out of whatever is keeping them stuck in life. Yeah. And when we're teaching the life and death and the StoryForge principles, we try to get people to zero in on those emotional shifts that take place at those major milestones in your life. It's not about what happens. It's about what changes. And good stories are always about transformation of some kind. That's really the heart of it.
Yeah. And some stories I think it's kind of interesting how some stories don't end well, and that's the lesson. Like good doesn't always triumph over evil. Sometimes
cautionary tales,
does win. I remember it always brings me back to the movie Seven. I don't know if you remember it. What's in the box? Brad Pitt said.
I remember
that movie had a indelible mark. I mean, I literally, me and my girlfriend were watching it. We were so just emotionally disturbed and visually disturbed. We got in a huge fight and broke up on the way over from the movie. We later got back together, but it was so dark. And we were just, you could tell we were just really shaken by it. But, there's a story where good doesn't win.
Yeah. Evil and it doesn't always, right? Good doesn't always win. The only time that a story like that should feel like a loss is if you don't learn something from it. So no matter what you're writing about, no matter what the tone of the story is that you're writing, you're trying to elicit an emotional response for someone and hopefully infuse a little wisdom that they otherwise wouldn't get if they hadn't kind of read or watched your movie, whatever your storytelling platform is. Yeah, as long as you move people on an emotional level, then you're winning. And so part of the conversations that we have is, what do you want to do with that? What do you want people to feel? And what do you want them to kind of walk away with in their mind? If you don't have those kinds of high level questions going on while you sit down to write, then typically what you're going to write is pretty surface level.
Yeah. It's trying to connect with people emotionally can be a challenge. You've done acting and appeared in films and TVs, I understand correctly?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit of on-screen stuff, mostly on stage as an actor, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, stage is one of the more harder things to do because, and with film you can do like a cut here, cut there, you piece it all together and stuff. But stage, you got to go on and it's live, right?
You're out there. Yep, you've got to make it happen on your own. Obviously, you're working with other actors in the scene, but the editor isn't there to save you if you happen to muff a line or something like that. So it's real, and that was a great proving ground for me. Again, being able to connect to an audience because when you haven't. If you're on stage, instantly whether or not you've got the audience. And if it's crickets, that's painful. But if you can get the whole house to just come down with laughter or with, a gasp. I played an abusive boyfriend in a play once. And after I slapped her, the whole crowd just sucked the oxygen out of the room. It was great. It was so satisfying to get that kind of an immediate response. But laughter, crying, you name it. If you can elicit that emotional response, and I should say the intended emotional response, because if you write a horror movie and people laugh at it, I wouldn't call that a victory. But if you could get the response you want out of people, then you're on your way. And then it's all a matter of what do you want to do with that power? Because it's really a pretty powerful skill to have. And you got to know what your goals are with it and what you want people to kind of do with what you're making them feel.
I had acting and modeling agency back in the day, and it was in Utah when Touched by an Angel was like really popular. This is clear the 90s and 2000s.
Yeah.
And LA had this huge what is it, union strike.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they there was a lot of films going to states like Utah that were non-union, and people were filming off-site there, where that whole thing got worked out and rearranged. And so I started sitting in with directors and producers to see how the casting thing worked, because a lot of the people in our agency were being cast, and it was interesting to watch. I learned a lot about acting from it, and you would have just an endless amount of these people come in to cast for a movie, and they put up these performances where they would just deadpan read the lines and stuff, little to no emotion, or maybe they'd try and invoke some emotion or try and have brought a character. And then you'd have people that would come in, and there's no, the crazy thing about it, it's probably a lot like stage. There's no music that can come up in a when you're doing the casting agent thing. There's no music that comes up. There's no scenery. There's no, the emotion is helped and aided by a lot of music, but there's just the actor there. Yeah. And you don't even sometimes have fellow actors unless they gear it that way. And to see, you would see actor or actress over and over again of different ones that they just wouldn't land it. You just be like, okay, boring, bye, see you, bye. And there would be like one guy or gal who would come on and they would just blow your freaking mind. And with no music, no background, the whole dais of producers and directors would be in tears or in laughter. Yep. Or in just emotion, and it would just be like an explosion. And yeah, the level of different acting is probably another thing people should learn in telling stories, and just learning how to present yourself and present things well, just like a speaker has to do when speakers go out on stage and stuff. You've got to present well.
If you're a public speaker, then you're an actor of sorts too. You're just playing a different version of yourself. But yeah, in my experience, there's basically two containers for all actors. There's the actor that wants to be seen, and then there's the actor that wants to disappear. Oh. I was always one that wanted to disappear, and we won't get into my mental health issues for that reason. But I wanted to disappear into a role, and I found that a lot of people showed up and would want to jump up and down in front of the camera or the director, the casting agent, to try to get their attention, and thought that was the way in. But it was always the still ones that really caught the eye. And it was a couple of people that had years and years of experience in theater that taught me that trick, that if you've got a bunch of people on stage and a bunch of them are noisy and jumping around and just doing like physical shtick, it's the one that's the stillest that will draw the eye. That one will pull you in. And what is that character's story? What's going on in their head? So it's just another way of learning to show the audience and not tell the audience. Don't spoon feed them, kind of draw them into whatever's going on in your mind, and make yourself as fascinating as possible. Use the audience's curiosity to control them, and then manipulate their emotional state. And it works.
So tell us how people, as we go out, how people can reach out to you, how they can work with you, potential, client structures you look for, do they have to have experience, et cetera, and your .coms as we go.
Yeah, I work with a lot of people who are brand new, that are just interested in learning the craft of telling a compelling story. So if you reach out to me at the website, jordanmorris.writerigniter.com, you'll see contact info there. Typically, I will meet with them at no obligation. I'm not a salesperson. I don't like selling hard on what I do. But if you want to get together and kind of converse with me about what's possible and what I might be able to help you with, I'm happy to do that. Because if you're going to invest in me, that's the least I can do, is to invest back in you first. And if we get on and you like, the sound of what I might be able to offer you, then perhaps we can work together. And if not, then I'll just do my best to be as of value to you as I can in the time we have during our conversation. Yeah. I love to talk to storytellers.
Yeah, to learn to tell stories, folks. I'm still learning to tell stories. I don't think I've mastered it. But you want to be an interesting person. Being an interesting person in life makes you, I don't know, I think you go much farther than it. being able to tell stories, being able to weave stories, be able to take news topics and weave them. No one likes someone who's, I've met people, I don't know what's going on with them, but there's a hole in their head, So do you have any stories? No. Did you learn anything today? No.
Sometimes it's a matter of them not really being sure of who they are. If you've got a
That's
really
true.
strong sense of self, then you've got a much better shot at telling a compelling story and having some kind of charisma when you walk into a room. Like you're just assured of who you are. And that's a part of being a successful writer too, is again, knowing your brand, knowing what you're good at writing, what you want to be famous for writing, and how you want to move people specifically. You'll get there.
Being a parent, being a partner in a relationship, being able to, we have to entertain ourselves throughout all these relationships and stuff that we do. My parents were told great stories. Evidently Santa Claus was real, and so was the Easter Bunny.
100%.
I knew them for a while until my grandfather tipped me off otherwise. So he had a different story. Anyway, thank you very much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Very insightful, and the importance of storytelling, Jordan.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I really had fun getting to meet you, and yeah, I'm very appreciative of anybody that kind of reaches out.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, Chris Voss 1 on the TikTok, and all those crazy places on the internet. Be good to each other. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. And that should have us out. This should be up